I don't know if any of you have read the book The Stand by Stephen King. It was published in 1978 and revised again in 1990. At almost 1,200 pages, it's one of Stephen King's longest books, but it's a deep investigation into the continuing human battle between good and evil, and how we are tempted by the dark forces of humanity to turn our backs on what is right and instead embrace choices that we know are not God's intention for our lives. It's a long book, but reading it draws you into the adventure, and soon you forget that you are reading a novel and you become a part of the story. In 1994, the book was made into a movie starring Gary Sinise. Maybe you've seen that one. There are a lot of adventures that take place in this novel, and great characterization, which is always the hallmark of good writing. The more an author can develop the characters in a novel, the more the reader is drawn in. And when characters in this novel have events happen in their lives, you feel their loss, their sorrow, their joys, and so on. One of the characters that the reader falls in love with in this novel is a woman named Abigail Fremantle, whom everybody calls Mother Abigail. Mother Abigail is 108 years old in the book, which would mean at the time of writing and so on that she was born in 1870. Growing up as a black woman in the Reconstruction era South, she encountered racism in many forms, but she thrived in spite of it. At the time of the story, she lived on a farm in Hemingford Home, Nebraska, having moved north to escape the Confederacy things that prevailed in the South. Mother Abigail walked a very close walk with God all of her life. And she becomes the spiritual leader of this group that gathers together to fight evil in the context of this novel. In this story, a diverse band of travelers from all over the country are drawn to Mother Abigail's house to bind themselves together to fight evil. They are drawn by Mother Abigail and visions of her home, visions that can only have been placed in their minds by God. Mother Abigail doesn't know how many are coming or who is coming, but she knows that she is called by God to welcome these strangers into her home for some reason only known by God. And welcome she does. As more and more people arrive at Mother Abigail's house, she welcomes them with open arms. Living on a farm, she has some reserves of food and supplies, but as a poor, old black widow living in a culture of white privilege, she also lives with constant issues of scarcity in her life. The dynamic between scarcity and abundance is a dynamic she walks daily, and a struggle that she must face as more and more people show up at her front door. Part of the narrative of the book is Mother Abigail finding creative ways to make her chicken, canned goods, and pantry able enough for the crowds that show up, expecting to embrace her wisdom and direction. She does so, putting folks to work, processing chickens, preparing meals, and picking food from the garden, harvesting. One scene in the book has everybody gathered around picnic tables in her front yard, an outdoor country picnic of sorts, enjoying the feast that has been prepared from the scarcity of Mother Abigail's pantry. Now, there may not have been 5,000 people at the feast that day in the book, but the parallels between this feast in that novel and the feast shared by Jesus on the mountain in Galilee that day are obvious. The gospel lesson that Garrett read this morning calls us to abundant living. But this miraculous feeding that Jesus did, that we've heard many times over, actually happens in the midst of death. If you read this in the Gospel of Matthew, the section of Matthew before this one, chapter 14, verses 1 through 12, before we jump in here in 13, relates the story of John the Baptizer being executed. John was beheaded by King Herod to please his niece, with whose mother Herod was having an affair. Herod's niece told Herod that she wanted John's head on a platter, and he complied. Now, John and Jesus, you know, were very close. Luke's gospel claims that they were cousins. Others speculate that Jesus was one of John's disciples for a time before going out on his own ministry. But whatever the connection, they were very close. And as today's lesson opens, Jesus has just found out that his friend, mentor, cousin, whatever, was killed in a hateful and ignorant way. Jesus is upset. You heard Garrett say at the beginning of the gospel lesson that Jesus went away, tried to escape, tried to go off and be alone. He's mourning. He's sad. He's probably angry with this system that Herod has in place that allowed his friend to be executed this way at the whim of this tyrant who doesn't care about the people over whom he's ruling. Jesus is not in the mood as he goes off on his own to entertain a crowd. He retreats into the wilderness to pray, to fast, to commune with God, and to reflect on the circumstances of his friend's death. But those followers of his keep getting in the way. They wouldn't leave him alone. You see, they were grieving too. Many of them had followed John the Baptizer before following Jesus, and many of them were still John's followers even to the time of his death. Their leader was beheaded. Now what would they do? Should they turn to Jesus? Is he going to carry the mantle left by John? What would they do now that John was gone? Now remember, this is early, before many people understood the messianic nature of Jesus. Before he was beheaded, John was the radical rebel that everyone followed. So that status didn't fall upon Jesus until after John was killed. So at the time of John's death, the community of faithful radical rebels that would become Jesus' followers were devastated. These mourning folks followed Jesus to his deserted place, and they communed with him. Matthew tells us that Jesus had great compassion for them. Perhaps they commiserated together, sharing their sorrow, standing vigil for this prophet, John, whom they lost. What happens next reminds me of what happens in our community when someone dies. Food becomes the object of compassion. In our community, when someone dies, our first thought is to bring them food, to bring them a cake, or bring them a casserole. This is a wonderful thing that we do. I've been to houses where family members have died, and they have received so much food that they are set for weeks. Of course, the food that's received is not about food. It's not about physical nourishment. It's about love. It's about faith. Material gifts of sustenance that we share when somebody in our community dies are expressions of community and the faith that binds us all together. So when Jesus shares this meal with his friends, we are not talking about bread and fish. We're talking about love. We're talking about embracing a community of people who are hurting and looking where to go next. There are two things that stand out in this story, and one is how Jesus instructs his friends. The disciples tell Jesus to send the crowds away, let them go buy food for themselves. But Jesus said, they need not go away. You give them something to eat. The disciples were taken aback by this, and perhaps it caused them to think a little bit about what they were doing in life, what their ministry really was. For a while now, they've been following John and then Jesus, doing what their leader told them to do and relying on their leader to make everything happen. With John's death, it was inevitable of them to turn to zero-sum thinking, turn inwards and do what was best for number one. Forget about others. It would have been easy for them to neglect the teachings of their leader for the past number of years and say, go away, there's no more to see here. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And in fact, this is what they did. Send them away, Jesus. We don't have enough. The lesson here is not about fish. It's not about bread. It's not about food. It's about the dynamic between scarcity and abundance. The disciples in their grief are operating out of a place of scarcity. But God is about abundance. God brings abundance into the midst of scarcity and tells us that you have plenty. Now go and feed others. Stop wallowing in your perceived scarcity and realize that you have plenty. And that plenty is not for you to keep for yourself, but for you to share. Send them away, Jesus. We don't have enough. No, you feed them. A church in an interim time could easily be like these disciples, circling the wagons and worrying about the scarcity. The pastor is leaving. What will we do? We don't have enough energy, commitment, money, time, knowledge, understanding, people, our ability to get by on our own. We need to start scaling back. We need to be ending ministries. We need to be cutting what we give to OCWM and others' benevolences in order to protect ourselves and our church and our scarcity. Send them away, Jesus. We don't have enough. This is an easy trap for a church to fall into. But Jesus says, no, you feed them. I had a conversation the other day with someone who advocated Bem Church cutting what we give away to outside benevolences and even OCWM because in the interim time after I leave, we need to circle the wagons and take care of things here at home. We only have 5 loaves and 2 fish after all. This was the essence of their statement. We need to stop giving and we need to start taking care of ourselves. To which Jesus would reply, no, you feed them. Now is the time to double our efforts, and we will wind up with 12 baskets left over. We, as sinful human beings, are used to existing in scarcity. There's only so much time, there's only so much money, there's only so much food, there's only so much love, there's only so much opportunity, and if we don't hoard the good stuff, we're not going to get it. This is the mentality of our world, our culture, our politicians, our leaders, and so on. But Jesus says, no. You feed them. And when we do, we will find that we have 12 baskets left over. Some of you know Kevin Weaver, who was pastor here at Bem Church in the 1980s. You may not know this, but Kevin was also my pastor in St. Louis after he left Bem Church. In the 1990s, he was my pastor in St. Louis, and one of the lessons he taught me was that we should always look at the church and God's work in the world through lenses of abundance, not scarcity. He told me and others at our church, I think I can say this publicly because he said it publicly, that when he gets paid each month, the first check he writes is for his house payment. The second check he writes is his monthly tithe to the church, 10% of his paycheck. He said that when he does that, there is always enough money left over to pay the bills. Other than the house payment, God's work was taken care of first, out of his abundance. And everything else fits into place. Of course, it's not about money, it's about heart. It's about intent. It's about being intentional with God's work and viewing God's work through lenses of abundance and not lenses of scarcity. Giving God your best and the best of your time, talent, and treasure, and letting the world have the leftovers, not God. I received information this week about the crop walk and all of the good work that our efforts do overseas. Crop has always been a passionate mission for Bem Church, and I believe it's our mission of the month in September. What amazes me is how much our meager efforts can do to change lives overseas. I read about Indonesia, where Crop is changing the lives of people by purchasing seeds and chickens for them to raise their own food. $40 bought enough chickens and seeds in West Timor, Indonesia, to change the life of an entire family. We raised $5,000 for Crop Walk last year here at Bem Church. That's enough to buy chickens and seeds for 125 families in Indonesia. Jesus says, you feed them, and we do. In Haiti, that $5,000 we raised last year will buy 10 cows, 25 goats, and 20 pigs for a village to develop a farming community and feed an entire generation of hungry children. Jesus says, you feed them, and we do. In Indonesia, it costs $115 to construct a sanitary latrine system for a family. That $5,000 we raised last year will construct sanitary latrines for 44 families. Okay, that's not feeding them, but you get the idea. One other thing that stands out in this gospel lesson is how Jesus distributes the bread and the fish to the gathered crowd. After the disciples bring the 5 loaves of bread to Jesus, he takes the bread, he blesses the bread, he breaks the bread, and he gives the bread. Take, bless, break, and give. This is the format of another familiar meal that Jesus shared, and one that we are going to share in just a few moments here. Keep in mind that at the time Jesus fed these 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, he had not instituted communion yet. This was quite a long time before the Last Supper, and yet here he is, taking, blessing, breaking, and giving. It could be argued that that was the first communion and not the Last Supper, but I won't go there. Why is that important? Why does that matter? Because, remember what I said at children's time, in the sacraments we see what is sacred. We see God's presence and we see Jesus' essence when we celebrate baptism and communion. And in the way we celebrate communion, we see the feeding of the 5,000 as well. God was very much present, not because of bread or wine or fish or water, but because people shared and loved abundantly, not scarcely. God's call is clear in this gospel lesson, and in so many like it. Scarcity is not the way of God. Abundance is the way of God. Fear and hate and hostility breed scarcity. Love and grace and peace breed abundance. God created us all to live abundantly, not to live in despair. So live abundantly, give abundantly, bask in the glow of abundant living. Give generously to all who are thirsting for love and justice in the world, whether it is your time, talent, or treasure. For the abundance of God's promises already belong to us all. As we have been given, so too do we give back to God. Amen.